I'm Shane, and I thought if I share nothing else this morning, I might give you an insight into my childhood. That was one of my first favourite TV shows. I love Gilligan's Island. Hey, a true believer. All right, we get a bit of that going this morning. You want to call out amen at any point? I love that. I love an interactive talk together, so let's do that. That's good. So Gilligan's Island, one of the great things you get from the very beginning is an important life lesson. And that is that sometimes when you're sailing off into the sunset, it's a fine line between sailing off into the sunset and a story that might begin, it was a dark and stormy night. Because one minute everything looks great, inviting, and off you go. And then the weather starts getting rough. And your tiny ship is tossed. Now we know from places like Gilligan's Island, I suspect most of us know from life, that both literally and metaphorically, sailing off into the sunset does have a fine line with a dark and stormy night. Because how seasons can change, huh? How sometimes you can set off on a new adventure into a new part of life, maybe even something as wonderful as a marriage or a new job or a new home or all sorts of things, and the voyage into the sunset takes a turn. It's exactly what happened about 2,000 years ago. The story I want to share with you this morning is written by a man named Mark. You might be thinking, who is Mark? Mark is a biographer of Jesus of Nazareth. Mark kind of worked as the scribe of a guy you might have heard of called Peter. Peter was kind of like the first follower of Jesus, the right-hand man. And Mark wrote in around the 50s AD. His account is one taken from eyewitness evidence. And his account is one that's written in the time of both believers and critics. So if it didn't stack up, it would have been discredited. And it's why even today historians believe that Mark's account is about as reliable historical document as you can come across. And so like they say on some TV shows, the stories I tell you, the cases I tell you are real. This is a story of how sailing off into the sunset quickly became a dark and stormy night. About 2,000 years ago, there's Jesus. And he's been preaching all day. Big crowd. He's sort of sitting on a boat just off from the shore, and everyone's listening. But as the day became night, as the sun was setting, he said to his disciples, who happened to be fishermen and experienced on Lake Galilee, let's go over to the other side of this lake. Let's sail off into the sunset. Now, I don't know if it's because I read things through my hyper-extroverted eyes, but as I read this account, I get this vibe, this feeling of expiration, of things fading away, because it starts with a voyage that is into the sunset. Do you know what sunsets become? They always become nice. And so we jump onto the boat with Jesus and his disciples, sailing off into the sunset, and it's warm and it's pleasant and it's beautiful, no filter required stuff. But as time goes by, not a lot of time, the sun will set. The light will expire. We don't have those beautiful high-powered LED headlights hooked up to our battery and stuff like that. We're on an ancient sailing boat, not so much bigger than this tinny before you. The light expires, and with the light goes the heat. And now we're out on the water as night is descending. The warm air is giving way to the cooler air as we sail. But not only that, Jesus has been in a space where he's surrounded by tons of people in the crowd. But as you see, and you can follow the story on the screen, he has left the crowd behind. Now maybe this is my extroverted bent. He's moved away from the energy and the capacity and the safety of the crowd. All the introverts are saying, yeah, he's gone to the good space. No, you're not right. He's moved away from the crowd and the shallows of being near the land, out into the darkness and the cool of the ocean. Interestingly enough, Mark wants us to know that some other boats went too. Maybe it was an inviting voyage. Maybe Gilligan and the skipper were there. I don't know. But I know there were other boats. They sail off. And they took Jesus just as he was. It's not that Jesus said, hey guys, you know that trip we've been planning? Well, let's go and get the supplies and do it. No, Jesus says, let's go. As night descends, they leave the crowd and they take him just as he is. He doesn't go back for the extra seagoing resources or anything like that. There's Jesus in his robe or whatever he wore at the time in a boat, and off they go into the sunset that gives way to the night. As it would in my favourite TV show so many years later, the sunset gives way to a storm. And let's sail off into the sunset as a story becomes a story of it was a dark and stormy night. The storm arrives. In fact, a furious squall came up and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. I don't tend to use language like furious squall. I don't know about you. I don't even know if that's how you say squall. A big storm came. In fact, when you read carefully what Mark has written, he says this isn't just a normal storm which these seagoing men would be used to. This is a hurricane, for crying out loud. This is a circumstance that can come about in this space because there are some weird geographical elements like Mount Hermon, which I've seen with my own eyes, snow-capped, standing thousands of feet above Lake Galilee, which is hundreds of metres below sea level. And when the cold air from the mountain and the hot air from below hit each other, stuff goes down. That's as far as my meteorological understanding goes. But stuff goes down, and on this particular night, a lot of stuff went down. There's a hurricane, and when you read Mark in his original language, which was Koine Greek, the Bible's always, the Bible, you got to understand, is a foreigner. And so from time to time he walks around amongst us saying, how you say, and we do our best to interpret and to translate. But at this point, the literal language is, the hurricane came and the waves were being thrown, like it's very physical, thrown into the boat to the point that the boat is filling up. They're going to sink, and everybody is bailing as best they can to try and keep this boat above water. Now at this point, if I'm in the boat, if I'm doing anything but bailing, I am at the front of the boat looking for what's coming up, trying to dodge the next wave. But not this Jesus of Nazareth. This historical figure, Jesus, isn't at the front looking out for danger. He is at the stern of the boat. He's at the back of the boat, on a cushion no less, and he's asleep. And in his slumber, he is awoken by panicked disciples, panicked followers who say, "Don't you care? Not just that we drown, but again, Mark's language, don't you care that we're perishing? It's about to be all over for us, teacher." I want you to understand, I don't know where everybody is in their concept of Jesus, but we can say with confidence at this point, particularly with the language of teacher, there's no Lord, Master, God before us. It's teacher, guy we're following. Don't you care that we're drowning? Don't you care that we're perishing? They're not saying, could you fix all of this? They're saying, you know what I think they're saying in their head? I think we've joined a wacko in a cult. This is 2,000 years ago, folks. There is not a church on every corner. The era of Christendom hasn't come yet. This is 12 guys who followed an influential teacher. Surely in their mind, they know in my mind, I'm on the boat, the dude's asleep, and I'm thinking, I joined a cult. The teacher's a whack job. He's going to go to sleep in a sea of delusion while I go to death in the Sea of Galilee. Don't you care? We're about to die. He wakes up. And in their panic, as Jesus wakes up, he does something. But before he does something, we should understand why these guys are so terrified. You would say, well, it's simple. They're scared that they're going to drown. Water will enter their lungs and their respiration will cease and they will die. There's more going on. I want you to take a moment, talk to your neighbour. You've got 3 words. In 3 words, just to your neighbour now, describe the ocean. Go. Okay, it was just 3 words, shouldn't take long. I'm breaking in. Raise your hand now. 3 words, class. I'll keep you back after class. Raise your hand now if you heard the words big, blue or wet. See, many hands go up, but did you notice not all hands went up? If I was sitting next to you, you would have heard big, blue, wet. If you were sitting next to my wife, for example, you might have had a different take. I asked Rachel the other day, describe the ocean. She said, hypnotic, powerful, enchanting. She thinks a little differently to me, a different take, just as valid, but a different take on the ocean. Now, would it be fair to say, if in our time, in fact in my household, two people can view the ocean in such, not conflicting, but different ways, where I go with Big Blue Wet, she senses the enchanting, hypnotic feeling of the ocean, could it be possible that we would lend ourselves to believe that people 2,000 years ago had another view of the ocean beyond ours? The people of ancient times, when they viewed the ocean, did not just fear water entering their lungs and respiration ceasing. No, for them the water was a turmoil. The water was a chaos. The water was perhaps even evil and demonic. In fact, their belief, whether it be right or be wrong, this is their perception, this is Mark's audience, was that to be lost at sea was the most terrible of deaths. We have our own view on what's a good death and a bad death. Their view was to be lost at sea kind of means that your soul will not find rest. There'll be no headstone for anyone to write RIP on. Your ghost may wander through an intermediate state forever in turmoil. Don't you care we're perishing? Don't you care that this storm is terrifying in our lifetime and tormenting in our death? I've followed a whack job. I've joined a cult. Don't you care about the circumstance now and the eternity we face? They challenge their teacher. Well, in a moment that no one has done before and no one will do again, Jesus demonstrates that he is like no other person who has walked the earth. He stands, and with the same authority that I would command my dog, be quiet, be still, he says to the ocean. And by his word, this crazy storm is stilled. Jesus rises and speaks, and the chaotic is met by the ordered. The powerful and impersonal force of a storm is now met by the person of Jesus, the one who has greater power. And so sailing off into the sunset gave way to it was a dark and stormy night. Now it was a dark and stormy night gives way to, and it was dead calm. Now imagine that dead calm. Imagine that dead silence. Imagine that dark sea. That's what you hear. Your own breath. After the terror of the storm, now in the silence, you hear your breath loud as it calms. In the darkness of night on that calm sea, you hear the gentle lapping of water against the hull of your boat. And in the dead calm, in that silence, 3 questions will pierce the night. Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? And who is this? It's not a whack job. Who is this? The first 2 questions, of course, are asked by Jesus. He asks his followers, why are you so afraid? Now, can we take a moment to agree? There may be some things this morning I share that you're not ready to agree upon. I reckon we can all agree upon this. Is it fair to say we can agree that when you're on a boat in a hurricane and your efforts to bail the water out and the boat is going to sink and the teacher you followed is asleep on a cushion and you also have a fear that your soul won't rest if you're lost at sea, is it fair to say that you might be scared? Can we agree upon that? Okay, that's great. That's unanimous. Okay, we can agree that nighttime on a sinking vessel in a storm could be a scary experience. When Mark describes this, he says, Jesus said to him, "Why were you so afraid?" And he uses a particular language of fear. He says, "Why are you..." This language is rough on our ears, but why are you in this state of cowardiceness? Now, it's not an insult as such. Let me try and put it in a different way. Have you ever been in a situation where you said, I don't have the stomach for it? Too much for me, I don't have the stomach for it. Maybe you haven't said that because you're too brave. When you're talking about someone else, you take stomach out and you say, they don't have the guts for it. Funny how those two words can just change the whole feel of a sentence. I don't have the stomach for it. They don't have the guts for it. The language is one of a fear that is based in a void, a lack. They don't have the capacity to deal. Jesus says, are you still not having the stomach for this sort of stuff? His next question is, have you no faith? Now, it's important that we understand what Jesus is saying. Jesus has demonstrated on a number of occasions in his biography, both this one and others, that he is very sensitive to the smallest of faiths. Jesus is not some hard-to-please judge who goes, think that impresses me? Not so much. Jesus is a guy who honours, reveres, and commends faith the size of a mustard seed. He's not looking for a lot to be impressed. So when he says to them, have you no faith, I want us to not just hear the words but understand the meaning. If I was rude to you and I said, man, you've got no brains, you'd be confident that though, yes, we can agree I'd be being rude, I'm not actually questioning your anatomy, am I? I'm not actually saying, I doubt that the central processing unit that runs all your bodily systems and does cognitive thought and all that sort of... I think it's not in your head. Quick, somebody call a doctor. No, what I'm saying is, what are you thinking? How is this working for you? Where is your head at? In the same way, when Jesus says, have you no faith, please don't hear a hard-to-impress teacher who says, so you followed me, you came on a boat in the night time, you've left everything behind to be my disciples. I'm not impressed. Instead, I want you to hear what Jesus means. And what Jesus means at this point is, where is your faith? What are you trusting in? Just like you got no brains, what are you thinking? What are you trusting? Where are you depending? I don't know if you remember, but when we set out on this journey into the sunset, they took Jesus as he was. What else did Mark tell us? And there were other boats. There were others who now hear their breath in their ears as the sea has been calmed. And I suspect Jesus is saying, hey, guys on the boat with me, how are you any different to those who are on the boat without me? Where is your faith? What do you depend in? What do you trust? And we can think that for them, much like those on the other boats without Jesus, what do they have? What do they trust? You know what I think they have? They have what I'm going to call boat hope and little else. What is boat hope? Well, boat hope when you're in a storm is the hope that your boat has capacity to match the magnitude of the storm. And so you think, I hope I've brought a boat that's good enough. I hope my boat is sea-going enough. You think for a moment, as was once thought in a famous movie, and you can tell me the title at the door, you'll get 10 points, we're going to need a bigger boat. We're going to need to increase capacity for this storm. You think to yourself, just keep bailing. Bail, bail, bail. Keep on keeping on. And try to make sure that the capacity you have and the things that you depend upon can match the storm that is coming against you. And Jesus says to these guys, where is your faith? What do you depend upon? Because here I am in the boat with you. You've seen me heal some people. You've seen me do some pretty freaky stuff. Where is your faith? Do you depend upon a boat and its capacities, what you can muster? Or do you depend upon me being with you? They're Jesus' two questions. The third question comes from the disciples themselves. I don't think it's actually a question. I think it's the kind of question, it's not a question of we don't know. It's the question that you ask yourself when you're in somewhat disbelief and you're stalling before you want to come to a conclusion. For they say, who is this man? Did you notice that Jesus said to them, why are you so afraid? What was their reaction to the storm? They were afraid. They didn't have the stomach for it. They were found empty. Jesus stills the storm, and does the fear go away? No. After the storm is stilled, after we go from dark and stormy night to it was dead calm, they were now terrified. You might say, how is that an improvement? It's important that we understand it's not just the magnitude of the fear that has increased. It's not just the quantity of fear, however you measure fear. It's the quality and the kind of fear that has changed as well. Mark demonstrates this in his language. They've gone from, we don't have the stomach for it, they don't have the guts for it, a kind of cowardice, to feeling very full. In fact, Mark, the way he says it is, they were fear-filled with fear. They've gone from an empty fear to a full fear. This kind of fear is a reverence, an awe, whoa. That's the best language I have for it. Whoa. They are so filled with the magnitude of who Jesus is before them. Why are they so filled? Because Jesus, as Mark records, has very skillfully and carefully shown who he is. The Bible that these 12 disciples of Jesus had was called the Old Testament. It's the first half of our Bible. And in this part, God kind of shows his fingerprints, shows how you can identify him, and sometimes he uses water. From the very beginning, in creation, God speaks about how the Spirit of God hovered over the deep. What was understood to be the chaotic, the mysterious, the dark, unformed, maybe even demonic mass of water, God hovered over and he spoke, and there was light. He demonstrates his divinity, his power over all things, his godness with that word. Sometime later, God would be in a conversation with a man called Job. Job was wrestling with his own storms and his life circumstance, and he challenges God a little and says, look, it just doesn't seem fair. If we met on an even playing field, I think I could show you to be incorrect in our debate. And God, in demonstrating his godness, says, I want you to think, who has said to the waters, you can come this far, but stop there, no further. Who holds the reins in the clouds? See, this control over storm-like watery elements is just so quintessentially a characteristic of God. What Jesus has done on this small fishing vessel is shown them without shadow of a doubt that he is God who is sleeping on the pillow. But here's the funny thing about sleeping on a pillow. That's something God doesn't do. Did you know there are 4 biographies of Jesus? The only time we are ever told in the life of Jesus that Jesus was asleep, yeah, you just heard it. In the midst of a storm, that's the only time the biographers of Jesus say, Jesus is asleep. Can't take your call right now. Which is a startling thing to say for someone who just might be God. Because there are some other parts of the Bible, like Psalm 121, that says, you know, God, yeah, he doesn't sleep nor slumber. He doesn't need a nana nap. Oh, I love a nana nap. God doesn't need one. Who is this man? What is revealed before them is that without a shadow of a doubt, this figure on their boat is God all-powerful, come to them as a genuine human being, a man. Who is this man? He is the God-man. He is God with the power to stop the storm. He is God come as man with the love to endure with his people in the storm. That's who this man is. I hope it won't be too invasive if I disturb the silence of our morning together with the same 3 questions for you. Let's go to the last slide. Who is this man? As you contemplate this person of history who has been revealed to us in a reliable historical document called Mark's Gospel of Jesus, who do you say he is? Believing and unbelieving but credible historians say this is a reliable document and that it is without dispute that a man called Jesus walked the earth. A man called C.S. Lewis once said, of this Jesus you'd have to conclude he's Lord, liar or lunatic. He's either the nutcase who some people followed who was ready to sink to the bottom of Lake Galilee. That doesn't seem the case. Or as the one who stilled the storm, he is God. He is the God-man. I don't know if we can agree upon that this morning. But I think it's fair to conclude from what we have heard from this reliable document that when you contemplate Jesus, you're seeing the God-man. Not a lunatic, not a liar, but the Lord. I want to ask you this morning, where is your faith? In what do you depend? As life's storms hit you, as you take on the inevitable challenges that I know we all do, where is your faith? In what do you trust? Where do you depend? Are you reduced to boat hope? There's no Jesus, there's no God. It's me against the world. It's me and my family against the world. I hope my boat can handle this storm. What do we commonly say? I'm going to need a bigger boat. So we bolster our resources, we double our insurance, we tighten our budget, we increase our defences, and we hope that our boat will survive the storm. Hey, we just keep bailing, we keep on keeping on, we do all the best efforts and striving we can to make sure that our life can endure the storms that inevitably come when you're living on planet Earth. Where is your faith? Is it both hope? Or is it hope, faith and dependence in the God who is powerful to end the storm and the God who loves you enough to endure the storm with you? His name is Jesus. Finally, let me ask you this. Why are you so afraid? Why are we so afraid? You might say, that's a bizarre question to ask, Shane. But I'm confident it's worth asking. Many, many psychologists will say to us, so many of the emotions we experience and see find their root in fear. Anger, a surface emotion of fear. Why are we so afraid? What is this void? What is this emptiness that is plaguing us that makes us a terrified people? Don't believe me? Man, a real-life episode of Seinfeld played out in our fair city just days ago as 2 cars caused a traffic jam as they, for 15 minutes, debated whether you can go nose first or rear first into a parking space. 15-minute standoff, everyone was stopped, and what were they so afraid of? What was the fear in letting the spot go? Was it just about parking or something deeper? When I ask you, what are you so afraid of? If I brought you by yourself on the platform and said, what are you so afraid of? What would scare you about answering that? Well, one of the things they contend is shame. That feeling that someone might say, oh, you're not up to scratch. That you might feel, oh, I'm not up to scratch. Shame is that surface emotion that comes from a deep fear of, I'm not sure I have the stomach for this. Why are you so afraid? Anger and defensiveness and so many of the little walls we put around ourselves come from fear. Grief, that feeling of despair that there is no hope and all is lost comes from fear. I wish I had time to tell you a little about the story of Horatio Spafford and the hymn we sung earlier. If you're interested, grab me at the door. Friends, who is this man? Where is your faith? And why are you afraid? Here's the wonderful thing that happens when you come to Jesus. There will still be fears, just like for the disciples. But the empty void of I'm going to need a bigger boat, I've got help, starts to give way to a beautiful fear. A fullness and a reverence and a regard for the mighty God who is strong to stop the storm and loving enough to endure the storm with you. You see, when you say, this man is the God-man, my dependence is in him, and my fear is not in the empty, my fear is in the full reverence for him, you know what happens? You stop telling your God how big your storm is, and you start telling your storm how big your God is. And life changes. And, you know, I suspect for many of us, for some of us, maybe just for one of us, life can change this morning. I want to lead you in an important prayer. This is a prayer where you might make some decisions. This is a prayer where you will answer the question of who is this man. This is a prayer where you will commit to where your faith, your dependence is. And this is a prayer where you will ask God for a fear exchange. I want to give you just a few seconds to digest the words as you look at them, and then I'm going to pray this aloud, and if you would like this prayer to be your prayer, then I invite you to say the magic church words, Amen, at the end, which simply means true. I have a reverent fear of God, and I love it. So I'm going to bow my head, and I invite you to do that with me as I lead us in this prayer. Lord Jesus, you are God. You have power over all. Today I place my faith in you to lead me through the storms of life and to rescue me from the depths of the grave. Mighty God, I ask you now to remove my empty fears and fill me instead with faith that I might be a fully devoted follower of you. Amen. If that was your prayer this morning, I rejoice, heaven rejoices, and the Lord is yours. God bless you.